In 2005, I was serving as a rabbinic intern in a little New England town called Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, being from South Florida, seeing the white picket fences and those small little houses that looked everything different, it felt like I was in Pleasantville. But there was an incident that shook the community to its core. There was a young man who had some mental health challenges. And one day he sprayed a swastika on a little old lady's door, who also happened to be the Kiddush lady at the shul. The community sprang into action. The mayor of the town came to the shul with the press. They proclaimed that day Holocaust Remembrance Day in Norwalk, Connecticut. The mayor stood on the bima between the two flags, as we see here. And he said, "Hate has no place here." Now, as a grandson of 4 Holocaust survivors, a first-generation American, this was a remarkable moment for me. I was raised on stories of non-Jewish neighbors who were friends one day and then turned their Jewish neighbors into the Nazis the next day. In that moment, I felt that never again, the vow my grandparents carried in their bones and the vow that my parents whispered into my childhood was actually being honored in America. Maybe we don't need to say it anymore, I thought. Perhaps here the Jewish people would find safety, and our story of survival would become an integral part of America's story. Fast forward 20 years later. 3 weeks ago, just outside of our doors at Share Kodesh, Boca Raton, Florida, a parent from a Jewish homeschool who rents our space during the day was walking in with her special needs child's aide, and they're waiting to be buzzed into the school because, of course, we have a lot of security. And out of nowhere, a car pulls out of the gas station. A driver rolls down his window, and he shouts, "Baby killers, free Palestine," and sped off. No one was physically harmed, but the words left their mark. A mother stood there too afraid to look up to see the vehicle or even the license plate. And all this happened right outside of our synagogue, where Jewish children come every day. This time, I'm not waiting for a call from the mayor. It's not that leaders don't care. It's that these incidences are happening every day across South Florida and across America. But before I paint a bleak picture about us here, I want to explain something. Because I speak to my colleagues all around the country, and I want to say that the Jews here living in South Palm Beach County, we are incredibly blessed. Because although we have had anti-Semitism, it has not been to the levels that other places have had. And thank God we have the support of our sheriff's department, who is with us both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. But what we experienced outside of our shul, that's going to happen more and more. And it's going to happen again and again because of the new blood libel. That all Jews, no matter where they are guilty of genocide. In early September, the International Association of Genocide Scholars passed a resolution accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. Now, as I'm reading this, it felt like another gut punch. But fewer than 140 members, which is under 30% of their membership, voted. And yet the headlines claim that the world's experts had spoken with one voice. The problem was the resolution relied on biased sources, including some with anti-Semitic records. Even within the IAGS, the process was flawed. One of its members, Sarah Brown, called it activism, not scholarship. And I bring this up because it's part of a larger pattern. If you repeat an accusation often enough, it begins to sound like it's true. And eventually, words inspire action. In late May 2025, in Washington, D.C., 2 young Israeli embassy staffers, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram, were shot, murdered outside the Capitol Jewish Museum after an American Jewish Committee event. The shooter, Elias Rodriguez, when he was taken into custody, he said, "I did this for Gaza, free Palestine." Just days later, on June 1st, in Boulder, Colorado, a peaceful march to raise awareness for the hostages was firebombed by an assailant yelling, "Free Palestine and end Zionists." And these words turned into action in September in front of our humble storefront shul across from our gas station, traumatizing a family and a community. When organizations falsely claim to speak with a single unified voice while spreading distortion, we're reminded why Yom Kippur calls us to account for the power of words and the sins of speech. For the sin committed against us through slanderous words and twisting lies into truth. For the sin committed against us by repeating falsehoods until it sounded like consensus. For the sin committed against us by branding the victim as the criminal and turning the Star of David into a swastika. As the grandson of 4 Holocaust survivors, I never thought that just 80 years after the most systematic genocide in human history, the Jewish people, us, that we would be accused of committing the very crime that nearly wiped us off the face of the earth. And what do we do when words meant to inform, to inspire, to move people to righteous action are twisted into weapons? That's what tonight is about. It's a night to confront the power and the responsibility of words. Tonight we're canceling vows, the sacred words that we're planning to make this year. I know this sounds confusing. How can I break a vow that I haven't made yet? In short, this service, Kol Nidre, all of our vows is saying, we didn't really mean any of those things that we're going to make and likely break. But there's a danger to that. We can start to believe that words actually don't really matter. But we all know that Judaism insists otherwise. Words are not throwaway things. They can be sacred. They can be powerful. They can even be binding. In the ancient world, when people made a vow or an oath, it was currency. It's like the dollar. It's just a piece of paper, a digit on a screen. Its value comes from the faith that we have in the United States economy. And that's how vows worked in the ancient world. They carried weight only because people trusted that words spoken before God were as binding as gold. But on October 7th, 2023, a sacred vow was shattered. Since October 7th, we Jews have had to face the painful truth. The vow that we said again and again for 80 years, never again, was broken. after having been to Israel, after having stood less than a mile from Gaza, after seeing into the embattled area, after talking to soldiers and victims, after having visited the killing fields of the Nova Festival and the massacre at Kibbutz Nir Oz, I can tell you I did see genocide, but not the genocide that the Jews are being accused of. During my trips to Israel over these last 2 years, I've heard stories that will never make the headlines. Stories that were so unbearable to tell that Israelis have post-traumatic stress from even telling them. And yet, they do it time and time again because we have a responsibility to listen and bear witness. I want to share just one of those stories that will never leave me. It's the story of Eric Peretz and his 16-year-old daughter, Ruth. Eric took Ruth to the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. Now, I know you would probably think this is not really good parenting to bring your 16-year-old daughter to a rave, but Ruth was no ordinary teenager. Ruth was born with cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy. She used a wheelchair to move around in this world. But she also loved music. And she loved to dance in her own way. It brought her joy. It made her smile. And her father, Eric, who devoted his life to making his daughter happy, brought her to Nova, amongst many music festivals that they'd been to. His wife, Hila, said he was a perfect father, a free spirit, who loved everyone, always smiling. They were found at Nova, their bodies embracing in what would be their final dance together as they were murdered. Never again might have been broken. But there is another oath that is in our hands, and that is never forget. And here, Yom Kippur itself offers us a model that we can use. Our sages taught us that the second set of tablets that were actually given today on Yom Kippur, after the first set were destroyed. The covenant had been shattered. Moses broke the first set in rage. And yet on this day, on Yom Kippur, God and Israel began again. Moses and God had to forget just enough of the betrayal to carve out space for renewal. The covenant was repaired, but it wasn't as perfect as it was before. Actually, it was stronger. It was more enduring because it was written in partnership with human hands, as well as divine words. So too it is with us. Never again may have been shattered, but Yom Kippur calls us to renewal. It calls us to take up never forget as our new tablets, etched with both memory and responsibility. This is an oath we take every year. Never forget actually appears in two places in Exodus, when our ancestors left Egypt, and also in Deuteronomy, when the children of our ancestors are about to go into the promised land 40 years later. We are commanded, remember Amalek. Amalek was the tribe that attacked our people from behind, attacking the stragglers, the weary. And Hamas, too, struck the most vulnerable. The sick, the disabled, the children, the mothers who could not run fast enough. But the Torah adds a troubling line. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. If taken literally, that means what you think it means. Men, women, and children. Genocide in response to genocide. That cannot be our path. Fortunately, it never was, because our tradition wrestled with this unbearable commandment. The rabbis imagined King Saul pleading for Amalek's life, just as Abraham pleaded for those in Sodom and Gomorrah. Other rabbis taught that we don't even bless this Torah portion because we can't bless destruction. And as the rabbis of the Talmud remind us, when the Egyptians drowned in the sea, God silences the angels. He says, "My handiwork is drowning, and you sing." Across history, Jews have seen Amalek in many different forms. It was Rome. It was Christianity. It was the Nazis. It was the Soviets. And sometimes we even called each other Amalek. But when Jews had no army, the commandment remained a theory. Now, since 1948, though, with the rebirth of Israel, the Jewish response to outside threats is no longer just a metaphor. Real power changes moral stakes. But many sages, including modern-day sages, believed that Amalek is actually something that might be inside of us too. Amalek became a symbol of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that tempts us to exploit the weak. The 20th century Israeli biblical scholar Nechama Leibovich went further. She said, Amalek lacked Yirat Elohim, which means the fear and awe of God. And how did we know that? Because it was exactly the opposite of how the Israelites treated the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. She said to remember Amalek then is not only to fight our enemies, but to guard our own souls, to build societies that defend the defenseless and keep its moral compass intact no matter what. And this message feels urgent today. It's no secret that Hamas attacked Israel when it did. The nation was divided due to the judicial reform protests. Israeli society was seemingly split, and Hamas saw its opportunity to attack not just from Gaza, but from Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis, and Iran. The plan was to flood Israel and destroy her on that day. The plan failed, but the war continues. As we approach the 2-year mark, this is Israel's longest war. And accusations of genocide grow louder every day. We saw it just last week at the UN. The irony of Jews being accused of genocide, it's almost unbearable. And yet, thousands of civilians in Gaza have died. And even if you, like me, reject the accusation, we cannot ignore the tragedy. I don't blame Jewish Americans who wrestle with this tension, supporting Israel's right to exist while struggling with how this war is being fought. Many Jewish Americans feel powerless as they see the videos coming in from Gaza. But as one teacher in Israel taught me, one of my teachers, Rabbi Mordechai Silverstein, he said the difference between being Israeli and living outside of Israel can be summarized as moralizing versus agonizing. He said, written with my grandchildren while filling in for our son-in-law, who was again called up to the IDF this morning. We can moralize. Israelis live in agony. And yet, every time I hear that word genocide hurled at us, I see Eric and Ruth locked in their final dance. To remember Amalek in their honor is to speak the hard truth. That if Hamas remains in power October 7th, will happen again. The command to destroy this enemy is not just a slogan. It is a terrible burden carried by young Israeli soldiers who did not choose this war, but must fight it. But with that burden comes a parallel hope. My hope is that Israel's leaders will try as much as they can to end this war, to end the needless suffering, to bring every hostage home. Because blotting out Amalek is not only about what we end, it's about what we build. And all of us must build societies where people like Eric and Ruth can dance again. A society where the straggler is escorted, not abandoned. A society where the fear of God is measured by our care for the vulnerable. And here in our community, we can take those steps to live out those vows. This year, in June, we're going to go to Israel for our first ever congregational trip to move beyond the headlines. We're going to have a new learning program called Spicy Torah, where we're going to really struggle with these issues like Israel and Torah and identity and justice. And all voices are welcome. On this day of remembrance, we will remember names, not just numbers. We will recall loved ones during Yizkor. We will name Jewish martyrs in Musaf. And for one day, the whole Jewish world will say Kaddish for them. And each time we rise to say Kaddish, we take a vow. Not one that Kol Nidre releases us from, but one that binds us to memory, to dignity, to life. Kol Nidre begins with vows that we know we cannot keep. But Ne'ilah ends with vows we know we must keep. To remember, to protect, to choose holiness over cruelty. So when the shofar sounds tomorrow night, let it be a summons to both courage and compassion, to defeat those who choose cruelty and to bind ourselves with unbreakable vows, to be the best of who we have been, and to create a future where our children can dance safely, and joyfully. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh Yameinu kekedem. Return us, God, to the best of who we have been. Return us, God, to the strength of our memory and the power of our hope. Renew our days so that never again is not broken this year, and never forget is forever kept. Amen.